Welcome to the Original Gangsters Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Burnstein. Very, very special edition. As you know, we celebrate the OGs, the GOATs, and when it comes to mob reporting in America, it doesn't get much bigger than Chuck Goudie from NBC Chicago. Chuck, thank you for joining me.
I've been a fan and a follower for a long time, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. I mean, I owe people like, especially in your neck of the woods, you and Bulldog Drummond, John Cass, Steve Warmbier, a lot of guys that were just taught me about the outfit. I didn't grow up being interested in this stuff or studying this stuff. I went to law school in Chicago in the early 2000s, was living in Lincoln Park and working for the Attorney General, Ryan, and they were investigating George Ryan at the time.
A lot of Ryans in Chicago.
Yeah, both. The Ryan was the AG, and then Ryan was the governor. And
right.
I started in law school. I was working an externship at there, and they were having me work some outfit cases on their end, and it piqued my interest, and I started just devouring anything I can get my hands on, and now I'm here 25 years later. So Chuck had the reason we brought Chuck on, and I'm so happy that he's joining us, is he had a bombshell report last month, and we're coming up now in the next couple of weeks on the 50-year anniversary of the assassination of Chicago, or former Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana, one of the most iconic gangland hits in American history. We've never really known what exactly happened. And now, because of Chuck Goudie and NBC Chicago, we might not know 100%, but I think we're closer to the answers than we've ever had before. And Chuck, through his reporting, has been able to put a spotlight on the fact that the killer and the Sam Giancana murder very well might have been Tony Accardo himself. So let's get into this, Chuck. Talk to us about your investigation, and it was so thorough. 2 parts, well, 3 if you consider the state of the outfit in 2025, which you did with another. I should have mentioned Jack Binder's name. I mean, that's in terms of writing about this stuff. Jack and being a historian, it doesn't get. I mean, Jack's the GOAT in that. So between that and the 2 episodes you did, deep diving the investigation into the Giancana thing, I mean, just tremendous journalism at a time when this stuff is not being reported out like it was in the past.
Well, you listed out a few people who have covered the outfit over the years, and it's a list that was small to begin with and is getting smaller because news organizations aren't willing to either invest the time or money or personnel to do these things, or basically it's just timing out. I mean, there aren't people coming out of journalism school today who either want to cover this story or are equipped to cover it.
Right.
And so I'm lucky enough to have transferred over from ABC to an organization here at NBC that is still willing to invest in this, thinks that there's an audience for it. And we certainly have found that out over just the last few months since I joined the organization, that there's a lot of viewer interest in these things. The Giancana multi-part special that we did really was not intended to reveal anything new at all. I mean, we set out basically just to do a 50th anniversary story on the Giancana assassination, and we're looking at reporting what has been reported over the decades, that it was unsolved, nobody knew who the trigger man was, and just basically tell an interesting history story. And then along the way, it became obvious through documents, but mostly through talking to federal investigators and prosecutors over the last 50 years, that there is a consensus at the Dirksen Federal Building in Chicago at 219 South Dearborn that this is not an unsolved case, that Tony Accardo did it. And faced with that, I mean, we had a totally different story that we were able to put on television.
I mean, I think people should know that again, when I've talked to people about this, it's been a very buzzy subject amongst people that follow this stuff and study this stuff, not just in the Midwest, not just in Chicago. Chuck and I are both Midwest guys, but a lot of East Coasters that I keep in contact with in terms of sources and people that are interested in this stuff. A lot of people have been talking about this, and I don't know, honestly, if everybody, I think everybody got the headline, at least from people that were not in Chicago. Some of them, I think, watched some of the stuff, maybe didn't watch it all.
Right.
But I want to be clear with what was being reported. This wasn't just Chuck Goudie and NBC saying that this was a conclusion they came to. I thought probably one of the strongest arguments made in this, in addition to the evidence that you presented, the receipts you presented, was that this, according to your reporting, and I was able to kind of confirm this on my end as well, this is the belief of the federal government.
Right.
They believe that Tony Accardo was the trigger man on Sam Giancana. This isn't, like this crazy conjecture coming from NBC Chicago.
Exactly. And it wouldn't have been on television if it had been just that. I mean, I'm certainly not equipped to take a look at a few FBI files and all of a sudden, pull the Accardo name out of the hat and say, okay, well, after 50 years, here's who did it. We did not have a name in mind and then go out to prove it. We didn't really go out to prove anything, but along the way of doing this anniversary piece on the Giancana murder, it became apparent that there were a number of people out there who know far more than I do about this, that they had these roundtable discussions during Operation Family Secrets, the big mob prosecution from 20 years ago. And among the murders that they solved through a variety of sources and evidence was the Giancana murder. And they were and are convinced that it was Tony Accardo who was the one and only trigger man and was the one and only person in that basement at the time that it happened. And that's what we reported. This wasn't NBC going out on a limb and saying, we've determined that we're going to close this case. Right. It was reporting, as we do frequently, from federal sources and people who have followed this very closely over the decades. And they've determined that it was that, and that's what we reported out.
So let's first start by tracing the root of this narrative, and then after that I want to go back and go through the evening, June 19th, 1975. So the first time that we heard some rumblings of Accardo's name being put out as a suspect in the Giancana hit was in the last 5 years or so. Frank Calabrese Jr., a good friend of the show. Shout out to Frank, and anybody that's watching that makes it out to Las Vegas, go check out Frank Calabrese, the Mob Museum. He's doing a kind of a one-man show there, and it's outstanding. I'm on the board at the Mob Museum, and I was part of the kind of consensus that built to get him there and get him a platform. And sometimes you can have a great story, and the person that's telling it isn't a great storyteller. Yeah. Frank Calabrese has a great story with who his dad and his uncle were, but he is a tremendous storyteller. So,
well, you've known him as long as I have, probably, or maybe longer, and he has honed his story to make it very tellable.
Yeah.
Originally, he kind of, as a lot of people do, stumbled through the on-camera part of this, even though he had a great story. He does tell a great story now, and he was one of the sources that we used in this piece, obviously.
So he came out, I don't remember if it was a podcast interview or a print interview, but he put this out there about at some point in the last 5 years. Right. And Frank Calabrese Jr., for people that don't know the ins and outs of the Chicago outfit, he was the son of a South Side Chicago, I guess we can call him a crew boss. He wasn't really a skipper. Frankie Breeze, hitman, crew boss, loan shark. And then his uncle was another Chicago mob hitman, Nicky Slim Calabrese. Nicky Slim ended up being the first Chicago fully inducted Chicago mob member to cooperate. The cooperation of Nick Calabrese came via Frank Jr., who was locked up with his dad in the late 90s and unprompted reached out to the FBI in the summer of 98 and offered to build a case against his dad. Via building a case against his dad, his uncle got pulled into it. And correct me if I'm wrong here, in Nick Calabrese's 302s and his debriefings, once he cut his cooperation deal, he clued in the government on what he had heard related to Accardo being the trigger man. And I believe Angie Hooks LaPetra, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, told Nick Calabrese that this had happened, that he had helped provide the gun, and something along the lines of JB, which was a nickname for Accardo, Joe Batters. JB might be old, he might be collecting Social Security, but he can still put in work if he has to.
Yeah, I mean, that's the essence of it. The only difference is that I'm not sure that he provided the gun, but he definitely provided the silencers for the guns.
Okay. Yeah,
right. Okay. For two guns, actually, as we reported out, there were two guns that were bought or obtained at the same time from a Miami gun shop. One of them was used on Giancana, and then a few months later, another one was used in a Milwaukee hit.
Right.
Both of them had silencers that were fashioned in Chicago by the same team.
And I mean, when we're looking at the source of the information to come out, well, Frank Jr. vis-a-vis Nick, the FBI vis-a-vis those 302s, can you just, kind of further validate Nick Calabrese to the audience about like this wasn't coming from some nobody. And
no.
Nick Calabrese was a guy that might not have been a capo or an administrator, but he was somebody that was trusted with outfit business.
Well, he literally had his hands in dozens of gangland hits, either personally was on the scene or was in on the planning of these gangland murders over several decades in Chicago. And Nick Calabrese really was the key to Operation Family Secrets. He was the one who provided federal authorities with information on, now we know, more than 30 organized crime murders here and a few other places. The feds made a tactical decision when they were prosecuting Family Secrets, according to what they now have said, to use only 18 of those murders as the basis for Family Secrets. They felt that number one, it would just totally overwhelm any federal jury if they had more than 18.
It was tough with 18. I was in the courtroom.
It was tough with 18.
I mean, it was tough.
Anytime, as you know, you have a multi-defendant case, it's difficult. And then when you start throwing, more than a couple of criminal acts at a jury, it becomes difficult to sort it all out. And so they somehow arrived at this 18 figure. I think it was because the actual defendants were connected to those 18 cases. Some of them were thought to actually have a hand in them. But beyond the 18, there were more than a dozen other murders that Nick Calabrese provided information on to the feds. They chose not to use those publicly, and therefore I still don't have the full list. I mean, you can probably piece together your own, but for the purposes of our Sam Giancana reporting, Giancana was in those additional murders that the feds took what Nick Calabrese said. They corroborated it to the extent that they could elsewhere. And they are now saying that they have cleared that in the eyes of federal authorities, not only the Giancana hit, but the others as well. Nobody's ever going to face justice for those. They're long past, not the statute of limitations, obviously, because there isn't one, but there is nobody to prosecute. Accardo's long gone in that case. And the other assassins are gone in the other cases as well. But the Giancana case was among those that Nick Calabrese cleared in the eyes of federal authorities.
Okay, so let's go back to summer of 1975. Sam Giancana larger than life mafia don during the 50s and 60s. Came up 42 gang, a guy that was loosely, or maybe not loosely, was involved with the Capone group as a young man. Rose in stature under Accardo. Really established his presence in the hierarchy of the Chicago mob by leading a takeover of the black policy rackets in the late 40s, early 50s. Becomes kind of the front boss, is all over the news and in the magazines and the newspapers with the Rat Pack and JFK and the McGuire sisters, and very, very high profile. Government had it out for him. Has to go to jail for contempt and eventually leaves the city in 66, goes and makes a lot of money in various endeavors around the world, Mexico, the Middle East, Europe, the Caribbean. And he's doing this pretty much solo. He feels like he's been not just kind of run out of the country by the government. I think there's the belief that he was somewhat deposed, taken out of his role as the mafia boss, and people weren't thrilled with his very high-profile behavior. He comes back in 74. Mexico kicks him out. And for that, I think he was back for 11 months before he was killed. And there was how would you describe the atmosphere between Giancana and his old contemporaries when he came back? I mean, it wasn't everything on the surface might have seemed like it was okay, but it wasn't okay.
Yeah, I mean, none of us was in those meetings back then, obviously, but some of the more in-depth reporting that was public in those days, and the feds who have spoken to people who were around in those days said that it was chilly at best, and that the rift between Accardo and Giancana was never healed. And when Giancana came back from Mexico, Accardo was not happy about it. But I mean, the guy lived a mile from him, and he was a well-known outfit figure. And what could he do other than what he eventually did, according to Nick Calabrese?
So you have Accardo and a lot of the other shot callers in River Forest. Giancana's in Oak Park. He's living in a basement apartment of a bigger estate that I believe his kids are living in the top part of the
well, no, it wasn't. It was a caretaker family, apparently. That when Giancana was in Mexico, he needed somebody to watch the house, and I'm not sure how he hired these people, but it was a Mexican family, from what I understand, and a couple of kids, and they were living on the main floor. And when Giancana returned, rather than oust them, he took up residence in this basement apartment that had all the comforts he needed.
Right. At the same time as some of this acrimony is coming to the surface within the OGs of the Chicago mob back in the 70s, you have the church committee in Washington convening and investigating CIA mafia relationship, trying to kill Castro back in the 60s, Operation Mongoose. Giancana's subpoenaed to testify. Jimmy Hoffa, the Teamsters boss that would disappear less than 6 weeks later after Giancana is murdered, is slated to testify. Johnny Rosselli, the handsome Johnny, the Chicago mob West Coast representative at one point, he's slated to testify. He ends up in a drum floating in Biscayne Bay down in Florida. So you have all these different situations floating and then kind of maybe coalescing in June of 1975. So let's go through the evening. Sam Giancana had just returned from Houston. He had gallbladder surgery.
Right.
And he was being, I guess, celebrated home that evening by two of his closest confidants from his days as a mob boss, Dominic Blassie, Butch Blassie, who was his longtime driver, right-hand man, and then one of his top enforcers and hitmen, Charles Inglesi, Chucky English. And they're with him for a couple hours, seeing how he
and
was
his daughter, one of his daughters also, Giancana's daughters also dropped by during that time. She actually was the one who brought the sausage over that, is now notorious for being in the fry pan when he got hit. Right. So she was there as well. So just to point out that this was not some outfit, gathering as much as it was kind of an open house that Giancana was having for himself as he returned home.
At some point around 10 o'clock, Chucky English and Butch Blassie depart.
Right.
And there is, and again, please correct me if I'm misstating your reporting. There was a Chicago Police Department OC unit surveillance team out beside the residence that seems to have followed Blassie and Inglesi away from the home.
Or at least that's what the reporting was to CPD. There's some. It's a minor point potentially, but just in the history of this, there is some belief that team actually saw Blassie and English leave and figured that was it for the night.
Right. They put him to bed.
Right. They didn't necessarily follow them. They may have ended up having a couple beers down the street and then called it a night. So in any event, they were no longer in front of the Giancana house.
Just to parse out some protocol, just for people that don't understand the way surveillance units work, and trying to maybe differentiate between what could be suspicious behavior and what was legitimate order of operation. No matter what organized crime group the police would be surveilling, they quote unquote put people to bed and wake people up. That's the terminology they use. It's when they get you in the morning, they're waking you up, and when they're leaving you at night, they're putting you to bed. And for certain outfit figures that are known, or certain organized crime figures in general, no matter what family or group you're talking about, for people that are a little bit more elderly, that are known not to be out on the nightclub circuit, that are turning in at 10, 11, 12 o'clock, surveillance unit will put them to bed when they believe that subject or that target is heading to bed. There's no reason to sit outside the house for 10 hours or 8, 9 hours when they're sleeping.
Right. These are expensive propositions for law enforcement to begin with. And so, they're going to waste a team sitting there while the guy's asleep.
So presumably you could say, like you just said, the unit thinks their evening is completed, that there's nothing more to watch, that the last two people or handful of people that were there to visit Sam Giancana has left, and now Sam Giancana is going to go retire for the evening, so they leave their post.
Right.
At some point in the next hour, if not a shorter time frame, somebody else stops by. We now, based on your reporting and what we're hearing, presuming this is Tony Accardo, who at that point had been in power as the overall caretaker, if you want to use that term, of the Chicago outfit for 30 plus years at that point. And how old would have Accardo been at that point? 70?
He would have been I think he was 69.
69, okay. Whoever came over there, I look at the nuances, and I think a very important nuance here is whoever came over, Sam Giancana was cooking for them. They weren't cooking for Sam Giancana.
Right.
And I think if it would have been more subordinate type people, they probably would have been cooking for Sam Giancana. But in this case, Sam Giancana is cooking whoever was the killer. Sam Giancana welcomed in and was cooking him a midnight snack of sausage and peppers.
And to tie that up, to keep with your nuances here, Sam Giancana wouldn't have been cooking that for himself,
right? Because
especially right after gallbladder surgery,
right? I think it's also interesting, and tell me if this is new. I had not heard this part until your report. The trigger man comes up behind Giancana and shoots him in the back of the head. He falls down, and then they unload the clip into his face. Was that part of the investigation known, that they had put 5 or 6 more shots into him as some type of message to keep his mouth shut, or not allow him to have an open casket?
Yeah, I think it was under his chin, those subsequent shots. I don't know whether that had been reported or not. I mean, it was interesting to me just because I didn't realize there were even that many shots. But that's what was in the records.
I mean, there's some nuance there. Would you say that as well? I mean, this is speaking to, I think, a level of anger coming from the shooter.
Yeah. If it had been, if this had been a hitman, quote unquote, the shots are fired until the person's dead. This was beyond that, mm-hmm. for whatever reason you might want to read into it.
So now talk about your, I guess I would say, receipts, that you were able to pull some surveillance logs and see that Tony Accardo had left his residence in River Forest, and it was logged by his surveillance team around the time that this is occurring, and it lines up with our timeline.
Right. The there was a separate surveillance team on the Accardo house.
Right.
And they keep a log of comings and goings. I mean, that's what they're there for. And I had seen those in the past, but I never looked at them in the context of Accardo as the possible hitman for Giancana. And I went back over those logs, and that, kind of hit you over the head. And then an Accardo car leaves before and returns after.
And then where the gun was ultimately discovered is also, raises some eyebrows.
It's between the two homes, depending on the route that you go. And the thinking always was that it was Blasi who tossed the gun out the window, but and it certainly could have been. You could have built that into the narrative as well. But if you look at the Accardo, the travel route, and the thinking that perhaps Tony Accardo, even at his age, would have been spooked by a police car coming at him, he tosses the gun into that forest preserve and then keeps on going. That's what the thinking is in any event.
Do we think, I'm just thinking aloud here, when I say we, I guess I'm talking about me, or is it possible, or is it likely that Butch Blasi and Chucky English were aware of what was happening, and that they were kind of priming the ground, and then when they left, either called Accardo to let him know, or actually went and saw Accardo, maybe drove him back there? Are those possibilities that are in your head?
Yeah. And anything in all of these incidents, it doesn't matter who you're talking about, are possible until they're ruled out. And is it possible that those things occurred? Of course, sure, it's possible. We're never going to know whether that played out that way. But what does seem unlikely to me in the Accardo as hitman scenario is that anybody would have known about it besides Accardo, and that in the Fed's eyes, that was one of the reasons that Accardo did it on his own, is so the circle of information and knowledge was really small, just Accardo. it's hard to imagine why he would have felt the need to loop anybody else in, because everybody was an underling. And it goes to the point that the feds have expressed to me that that's why Tony Accardo uh, did this by himself, because he wanted that circle to be small and he didn't trust anybody else with the information.
I just want to throw out at you a comment that was made to me by a source when I followed up your reporting and went out to some people. And if you're subscribing to this theory, which frankly I went from when I heard this 5 years ago or however long and saying I got so much respect for Frank Calabrese Jr., but I don't think that this is plausible, to now 5 years later after consuming your reporting, and I would say that this is what I lean towards believing now. I think this is what happened. Is there a scenario, or this person said to me that Accardo, I think he was somewhat speculating, but this was somebody that is involved in outfit affairs now, as an older guy that was around when Accardo was around, said that his take on this was that Accardo felt like he created the problem in the sense that he empowered Sam Giancana however long before that. And this was his way of saying, I created the problem, now I'm fixing the problem.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't. It's not much of a leap to believe that was the case.
How much animosity was, in your opinion, circulating when Giancana came back? Was it just Accardo and some of the other top guys, or was this kind of like throughout the rank and file of the outfit? He was perceived as not one of us anymore.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure whether it went that direction as much as there was concern that this was a guy who attracted attention just by walking down the street, and then he was magnifying it by all of the relationships that he had, putting himself, up front publicly, and that kind of thing back then and to this day really doesn't fly well in any organized crime operation. I mean, the intent is to cover up what you're doing and not have it be known. And here Sam Giancana is hanging out with people who are followed by paparazzi. Giancana is a known figure. You have different investigative agencies from the U.S. Senate on down who are interested in putting Giancana on the hot seat, and all of a sudden he's now back on the scene in suburban Chicago. So the odds were against him from the moment he returned home, it would seem, and that's why I think Accardo, if you go with this thinking that the feds now have, why Accardo showed up that night and handled things personally.
Let's play the what if game. What if, when Sam Giancana came home in summer of '74, what if he was more open about opening his pocketbooks? I think there was a belief that he had made all this money overseas, wasn't sharing any of it, and that the Accardos of the world were owed a piece of it because he wouldn't have been able to go out and done it if he hadn't have been Sam Giancana from the outfit. Giancana, from what I understand, was arguing, this was all done by me. This had nothing to do with you guys.
Right.
I was no longer the boss of the outfit. I was operating independently. Thus, you don't see any money from here. Let's say
you would have to think, right.
Let's say
you would have to think that would have had there might have been a change of heart there
if he came back and was doling out money to people.
Exactly. I'm not sure whether that alone would have done it and changed the landscape, but it probably would have gone a long way based on the amount of money involved and who it was that thought they were owed the money.
As we wrap up here, it's interesting to me that you mentioned that, and it makes sense when you look at the timeline, that this was all coming out of Nick Calabrese's debriefings and his cooperation, that they had other murders that they could have charged in family secrets. I have a personal affinity for that particular part of history because that's where I really established myself as a mob reporter. Before my reporting on my hometown of Detroit, which came in a couple years later or around this, I right out of law school got a book deal and a coverage gig covering the Family Secrets trial. So I was there in the courtroom, 85% of the days. Trial started at the end of May and lasted till October. Very dramatic, very groundbreaking. But I think there was still there was part of the meal left. I think people thought that still needed to be eaten. And whether it be the rumors that were coming out back then about Family Secrets 2 that never happened. But the fact that you're saying, and it makes sense, that Nick Calabrese helped him solve another dozen murders or so that never got charged. Do you have a theory about why? And you did some amazing reporting. The stuff that you did with John DeFranzo, a couple years later when you met him, lunch with no-nos. That's some of the greatest, man on the street type reporting you're ever going to have in the world. Where you sat outside the parking lot with those guys all in there, and you got Johnny DeFranzo to engage with you. He didn't seem worried that there was going to be a Family Secrets 2.
Sure didn't.
There was no Family Secrets 2.
Right.
It was funny how you said, how's Marco D'Amico doing, who has just been in the restaurant with him, and he's like, I don't know who you're talking about. I never heard of the guy.
Yeah.
No idea who he is.
It was good TV, that's for sure.
And that was probably the last. Was that really the last time the public saw DeFranzo? Because after that he kind of lost, dementia took over.
Right, probably. I mean, I had never seen him that close up before and never saw him again after. So I would say that was probably true.
So I know this is pure speculation and I don't want to get, accusatory or into the weeds or anything, but just a general gut feeling on your part. Why wasn't there any more? Well, wasn't there a follow-up to what all the information that they got from Nick Calabrese and it seemed like there was more meat on the bone there that they could have chewed on, that they decided not.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons, and this is really not played out, and I don't know whether anybody would ever say, yeah, this was it, but Mitch Mars, who was the lead prosecutor on Operation Family Secrets, died.
The bulldog. He was a bulldog.
Yeah, he was the driving force behind this. And while there were great attorneys underneath him and who had to pick up the ball, it just always struck me that if Mitch Mars had still been around, perhaps he would have pressed forward on an Operation Family Secrets too. Whether it was called that or whether it was just individuals that they went after, Mars was not there to do that. And so it just seems like the timing of that was conspicuous.
So just my one follow-up to that is there were 3 outfit hits in the 2000s, in the years leading up to Family Secrets. And then, really it was trial was in 2007 and there were murders in 2000 or 99, 2000, with Ronnie Jarrett. There was the Tony Chiaramonte hit. After that in Lyons Township at the Brown's Chicken on Thanksgiving. And then there was the Tony Zizzo disappearance in August of 2006.
Yep.
And I know this would just be speculation on your part. Do we think that Nick Calabrese gave them information on those? I know we already know from an informer, Bobby Cooper, who was the driver on the Chiaramonte hit, that this tough Tony Calabrese, according to him, was the trigger. He died in prison, tough Tony. So we know something, but do you think that Nick Calabrese was able to shed light on those hits?
I think he was able to shed light on any of the open mob hits, more contemporary mob hits from the 70s and 80s. Yes. late 60s through, through the time of Family Secrets. It's a list I would love to get my hands on, and I'm working to do that, because I think that there's some reporting yet to be done on that.
Oh, well, we are eager for you to do that. And when you do that, please come back on OG Pod and discuss it with us. Again, I just thank you so much, Chuck, for taking some time out to join us. Your reporting has always been as first rate as possible. Just again, I wouldn't know, half, if not more than half of what I know about the Chicago outfit if it wasn't from consuming your reporting. And there's not many of us left, so keep fighting the good fight at the mainstream media, the corporate media. NBC Chicago, Chuck Goudie. Please, if you haven't, go check out Who Killed Momo, which is his two-part series investigating the murder of Sam Giancana. He also has a kind of companion report about the state of the Chicago outfit in 25 with him and Jack Binder, where, it's basically, it's there, but it's different. It's changing. It's evolving. Priorities in law enforcement have also shifted. But I think it's a good discussion you have with Jack Binder about that. And then just outstanding reporting on the Giancana things. Thank you so much, Chuck.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Always good to be on with a hometown guy. Appreciate it.
And Chuck's from Detroit, so he's a Detroiter, and I spent 10 years in Chicago, so I consider myself an honorary Chicagolander. And it's true. I mean, people ask me all the time how I got into this. If it wasn't for me being in Chicago and being in law school and not wanting to be a lawyer, but getting exposed in an externship as just a coffee boy. I mean, that's what I was. I mean, I was running around with Cook County sheriffs, just, fetching them coffee or holding their clipboards. But I got to go out with them. It was actually, it was after Chiramonte. I went out and did some interviews with them related to the Chiramonte hit. And that to me, like, it brought like, I'm living Goodfellas. Like, that's how I felt. And then I had a professor in law school that encouraged me to maybe start thinking about writing and reporting about crime as opposed to being a lawyer. But it all started in Chicago. So thank you very much, Chuck. Enjoy your rest of the day. For Chuck Goudie and my producer, Benny Behind the Glass, I'm Scott Burnstein. OG Pod, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much, Chuck. We'll see you guys next time.